I'm Edwin Wong. I curate the Risk Theatre Playwriting Competition. And today I'm here with Josh Drimmer, who's won the fifth annual Risk Theatre Competition. So he takes home a $10,500 first prize. And then in November, we're going to be workshopping and staging a production of his winning play, Mason Wright's Last Night in Town. And I'll tell you a little bit about Josh. Josh Drimmer writes comedies with unexpected drama and dramas with sharp, piercing laughter. His plays include Saint Ukraine, Story and Her, The Lighthouse Invites the Storm, Halcyon Days, The Beeping, Love is Good, and Falling. Is the book writer of a new musical, The Last Days of Pompeii, and a cabaret, Rejected Showgirl, a member of American Renaissance Theater Company and The Pool, and a Brooklyn Night until the city finally spits him out. So his plays are on NPX, and his website is joshdrimmer.com. That's JOSHDRIMMER.com. Welcome to the interview, Josh.
No, thank you for having me. And as I said last time we spoke, thank you again for your enjoyment in the little nasty play that I brought you guys. Yeah, happy to be here.
How long have you been playwriting? Let's start there.
I've been writing plays, I guess, technically since 2000. So I've got 23 years in the game, if you count it that way. The first play I wrote, I literally just saw a tiny ad for something Houston's Alley Theater was doing called the Houston Young Playwrights Exchange. Houston, tell nobody, is a city I still have yet to actually go to. But at the time, my family was living in Mexico City, and we had a P.O. box in Houston. So I was like, I fit under this. I've always been curious to get to this. Maybe at that stage, even I realized that my writing skills far outweighed my acting skills, though I was kind of pursuing both in college. And yeah, I picked up a book called the Dramatist Toolkit by Jeffrey Sweet, a really great introduction to some concepts of writing. Did a little bit of what I thought was a ripoff of the initial scene of 6 Degrees of Separation. Wrote a play that went backwards and got in to that festival, which they staged. I have the videotape around here somewhere, but yeah, I've still never been to Houston. Maybe one of these days.
And so you're in Brooklyn now.
Mm-hmm.
How far away is Houston from?
It's a big country, as you know yourself from living in a big country too. Yeah, it's not a skip and a jump, but maybe a 3-hour flight. I don't know.
Okay. And so when you were going to school, were you studying acting and theater, or?
Yale has a funny thing still ongoing about, like, it's interesting because Yale attracts so much amazing talent, as I can say from getting passed over for so many parts by that talent. But they're attracted by the reputation of the Yale School of Drama, of course, a graduate program, whereas the undergraduate program has always been I think they only started offering theater studies as a major in the 70s or 80s. They've been very cautious about having their young minds dedicated to such foolery and nonsense. But at the time I was going, some major things started to change. The last year I was there, they had an undergraduate's play writing festival for the very first time, which is awesome, and which was like my first chance to really get exposed to what a full length of mine would look like. So I did English and theater studies as a playwright concentrate as a double major. I don't even really exactly know why now, except for the desire to read way too much and otherwise be protected from science and other useful pursuits as much as possible. But yeah, that was my focus then. And yeah, I've been stumbling through on that ever since. I got to the chance to write two full lengths as an undergraduate, and yeah, it's nice to be in the protective shell and to really be really pushed to do work really quickly. I think in one of my playwriting classes, it was just hilarious because I think pretty much everyone wrote at least 33% of their final full length play the very night before. Some people scrapped the idea they had going in entirely and wrote an entirely new thing, fueled off of probably at that time in the 2000s, like Jolt Cola and Madness. But yeah, good times.
Oh yeah, no, I remember in my own university days, I'd go to the Felicitas, was the bar at UVic. We'd go to Felicitas and drink beer and complain about how much we had to do. It was what we used to do, but it's sort of ironic because you should be instead of complaining about doing things, it would actually be more productive to be actually doing things. So
Yeah, but it's part of the process too somehow. One of my best teachers, Deb Margolin, like when a friend of mine, said that like what he'd been doing and he was hating himself was just like sitting at a desk staring and not getting anything done. She cleverly noted that the sitting at the desk and not getting anything done, the frustration, the attempt to push things forward is part of the work. So you don't need to be like creating 5,000 words a day to be successful. It's more important to just take that time. And I feel like the complaining and drinking beer somehow probably like was moving some invisible glaciers for you guys too.
oh yeah, oh yeah. So that's interesting. So how long does it take playwrights to put together to write a play? So I study English a little bit. So Shakespeare, he had his own company. He was a sharer in his own
Hmm.
company. He also acted the roles, and I'm discovering that maybe he had a limp. Some people speculate that he had a limp because a lot of his characters have a limp, and they're the character that he would be the guy to have played in his company. But he was also writing the plays, and he could come up with a play in a couple of months. Uh, how does that compare to what playwrights are doing today?
Yeah, needless to say, Shakespeare like is not a model that anyone should reach to because he makes everyone look and feel bad. But that's interesting. I think maybe there's even a difference to the way he worked because with like maybe two exceptions, like every one of his plots was based on another plot, no matter how he warps them. So he was as much an adapter as he was a poet and a beacon of all language. But I set myself something interesting. I was struggling with writer's block for years, like maybe between now I think about it, maybe it was only 2 years, but it felt like 20 between like about 2004 and 2006 or so. And my solution for that was basically just to resolve that every single calendar year I would write something new. Like it just like setting that as a clock, knowing that like January can be like a time where you're like slowly winding up and accumulating material and figuring out what you're going to do. Hopefully spring is good because summer is going to often be your more lax time. as you're otherwise baking in this dying planet and struggling for thought, and then like fall and winter spring things forward. Um, but like since then, I've actually been like even better at this. There have been years that I've done more than one play. There's been certain concepts that are easier to do than others because they're more monologue, or there's something that or even like working off of like a previously failed draft or concept gets faster. Um, I want to say that this particular play, Mason Wright's Last Night in Town, was maybe about a 7 or 8 month process. I definitely had a lot of false corners. I had to write a lot of stuff that didn't in any way make it into the play. Just thinking around that concept of what it's like to get out of prison and to try to make a life again, and also to fail at basic concepts of reality going into it. Um, so yeah, it's wildly variable. It takes I always like to have patience for myself, but like the bigger thing is whether it's productive or not is to just sit down at some point during the weekend and occasionally during the week as well, and always find that time to really like set things down and inch by inch get closer to some kind of end. Um, then you get to rewriting and you realize there absolutely is no end to this at all.
Yeah.
But that's also part of the fun of the game too. Another thing, like in my maturing as a writer, is definitely the fact that like at one point I didn't even really believe in rewriting, whatever that means. Like, that what was set down was what was meant to be. Now I think I enjoy rewriting more than I enjoy writing, because I have a sense of what's there, of the people I'm dealing with, and it's a little bit more fun to just get into the weeds there, and to really consider your choices now that you've blazed one possible trail.
Yeah, the rewriting is funny. There's a lot of artists that will continually rewrite. I'm thinking of Thomas Hardy. Decades after his novels, he'd still be polishing them off and rewriting them. And musicians too. We've talked about music before. I think I'm thinking of Bruckner,
Mm,
the symphony writer, and a lot of times for decades he would keep reworking and polishing his pieces, and then sometimes there's so many different variations that they're almost different, they become different works almost.
yeah. And yeah, playwrights are infamous for that too. Maria in Forbes, who is known for like rewriting and changing some of her works years after the fact, even like some of the most popular ones, even after they've been staged. Um, and it's tempting. Like you go back to anything you wrote some time ago, and you'll find something that you're going to be embarrassed about, whether you should be or not. But yeah, I guess because I'm more focused on continually writing stuff. Um, the desire to change things up years and years after the fact, unless you have like a real reason to, is a door I try to close, because yeah, you could play with your one set of toys for the rest of your life if you so chose to. There's no such thing as perfect. There's only like what you're not thinking of anymore.
Yeah, and the fun thing about going back on things that you've written, do you find that there's an archaeology in your work, that when you go through something you've written 5 or 10 years ago, all the memories come back of what you were doing, what was inspiring you, and there are things that you would have forgotten unless you had written this play as like a testimony to what who you were at that stage. Do you find that who you were at that
Yeah,
stage?
it's like a really complicated archaeology, because like not just anyone would be able to pick up a play that you wrote and like and see these things. But yeah, you see songs that you were fascinated in, you see like ideas of the world that you were exploring at the moment. There's just all kinds of tiny things. The embarrassing things will occasionally be when like, you thought that like something was a bold moment of truth, but in fact it was just like a wild and sometimes dumb opinion you had at the moment. Um, but well, that's the good thing about writing plays where I'm not always obvious about where people are supposed to laugh or where they're supposed to gasp, is that you can get away with those things later. And it's funny too. Like I think the way this really like manifests itself interestingly is when friends of mine see things that I've written, and that's where you like get people that are quote unquote laughing at the wrong time, because like they're like, oh my god, that's just such a Josh moment right there. Those moments where like no matter how good you've been about delineating characters and so forth, something about you has just sort of has sort of shown through regardless. Um, there was even like in a play I wrote, The Lighthouse Invites the Storm. I took a family story where on a road trip to Vermont, I think I might have been 10 or 11. I was too old to be this naive, but I said like I was just curious, like looking out, like, man, Vermont, like why are there no people in Vermont? Why is it so vacant out here? And my sister and my dad immediately started to spin a story about how Vermont was like at once the most populous state in the Union, and was as fruitful as slave state Mississippi. But then came like the the blizzard of 1826, which wiped out the entire population. And I was embarrassed by, of course, the fact that I believed this, like completely as they were telling me it.
Oh, I'm
But yeah,
believing this as you're talking.
yeah, but years later, that was like something that I then like had got to have one character fuck with another with. And naturally, when my family saw that play, that was the thing they found the most funny.
So do you come from like is your family a family of storytellers, and that's one of the things that got you into putting dramatizing these stories in?
I came to it, I think, in a different way. I definitely my parents were, though both like never like committed to being professional actors, did a lot of acting. When we were living in Guayaquil, Ecuador, when I was young, actually, as well. My dad
Oh
moved
wow.
around because he did agro business, but they actually like pretty much ran a little English language theater company for a while.
Oh.
Um, so it must have had an impact on me, just like being left there to go through their rehearsals. At one point, I was basically the book, because like, yeah, when I, having heard these lines over and over again, like I knew when they got something wrong or something. So I had a lot of experience, and a lot of exposure to theater, but it's hard to say otherwise. I know that there's in my mom's side of the family, there's definitely a tendency to journal, to take down stories, to keep family lore going. But I don't know if we're more storytellers than anyone else. I just know that like as a really shy kid, like I I really put a lot of myself into the specific way I played with He-Man. Like I very much like set like cast off of the dolls that I had and like set an adventure in motion and moved it. There was like maybe some weird structure going on at that point, even for me. So like storytelling is a way of at once getting outside of yourself, and also then potentially expressing yourself. And I think like both of those points like were pretty important to me when I was young, as a means of getting over my own shyness, my own like whatever stutter I had at that point, all of that good stuff.
And the storytelling, let's jump into Mason writes Last Night in Town, and I should read the blurb for the people who haven't checked out the play, and it's also on NPX if anyone wants to take a look at it, and if you're interested, you should. So Mason writes last night in town. It's fresh from 5 years away over a little bit of ATM robbery. Mason Wright has reasonable goals, or so he believes. Make a mint playing poker and get his estranged wife Maya back. But is he as good a card player as he thinks? Was Maya trying to tell him something by never visiting or writing? Will his charm run out before his old friends remember the way things usually go with Mason? There will be damage from Mason's many avoidable mistakes. His daughter Lex already has her scars. But whether Mason's going down this time all depends on when he gets out of town. So this play, when I read it, the first thing that jumped out is just how I feel like I've known a Mason, or I've known in my life several Masons, like this charming, roguish character. He jumps out of the page at you, which is really amazing. And the play seems to be based on an idea, almost a dramatization of an idea. And the Scott Fitzgerald quote at the beginning of the play, it really hit me hard about, and I should read this out too. Of course, this is from the Crack Up. Of course, all life is a precious process of breaking down, but the blows that do the dramatic side of the work, the big sudden blows that come or seem to come from outside, the ones you remember and blame things on, and in moments of weakness, tell your friends about, don't show their effect all at once. There is another sort of blow that comes from within that you don't feel until it's too late to do anything about it, until you realize with finality that in some regard you will never be as good a man again. The first sort of breakage seems to happen quick. The second kind happens almost without your knowing it, but is realized suddenly indeed. So we're like, yeah, how does this tie into the play?
I think the thing that went well with this arc of the play, because in some ways I don't know if Mason learns a damn thing throughout the entirety of his post corrections journey, but like what you do get as an audience member, as a reader, is a further realization as the play goes on of how broken and how weird and how off Mason is, which is a product of what happened to him in prison, obviously, which we only get so much of, but it's definitely alluded to that he's spent a lot of time in solitary, thinking of poker hands and so forth, but like still solitary, the grand way to lose yourself by being too much with yourself. So I'm getting lost in this already a little. I think the bigger arc is just that sense that over time you get more and more sense of the fact that though things could have gone differently within this play, though maybe his luck at the table could have been different and other matters could have occurred. In some ways, like the events are also a little bit inevitable because Mason just is not a capable human being. He's extraordinarily charming. He's very able to get his own way, at least with people that don't know him super well. But in an overall way, that damage, that break, the stuff that F. Scott is talking about, and it's a heartbreaking essay because he's so self-eviscerating about himself at his own moment. He went on after that to live a few more years and attempt to do Hollywood and also attempt to write the Love of the Last Tycoon. But this overall sense of being a broken person, yeah, that essay really stuck with me. The whole book is good. It's got a couple other good pieces in it, but that core essay and the idea of just having used yourself too much, having no longer having like enough human spark left in you to ever be the person you were before, just really stuck with me.
Yeah, and it seems that that's happening to Mason during the play. He's still got it. He's on, and he still has the fire, but he's definitely breaking down and broken down too at the same time. Is there when you write the play, is there something that you want the audiences to come away with, to talk about? Like, is there an aim you have in mind, or
Um, like occasionally I've written things that definitely have like a core message behind them, but even there I don't know if I necessarily always commit to that being the essence of it. Like I wrote a play, for example, They All Stay With You, about basically the post climate change world, and a family that can't really go outside very often, and but then like my brain being my brain, it's like, well, somehow this like became a play that was as much as anything about the ghosts that haunt their place, and the weird interaction they have there. I find usually that the message or the takeaway finds you rather than the other way around, um, or at least that's how it ends up working for me. So I'm much more focused, especially in earlier drafts, um, on making on learning about the characters as much as possible, letting them guide the play. That may not make perfect sense, but it does often feel when you're like in the midst of writing that the actions are really coming from them as opposed to you. The very first play I wrote, the very first full length I wrote in college, wasn't much of a play until one of my then three characters just decided to, they were waiting on a subway train, and he just thought, yeah, well, I'm going to chase that train. So he jumped in the tunnel and ran after it. Not my idea, I swear, but he had to do that. And I guess the same, definitely for this went a lot with not all of my plays are centered around a single protagonist. A lot of them are actually much more likely to be group stories. But Mason's needs and wants definitely drove this play and drove it into some very interesting and dark corners. So I mostly just had to figure out how other people were going to react to him as he went. I definitely had the sense that there would be a weird kind of stopping point in the middle of it, where he has to face reality, by which I mean he has to face his wife and daughter, like actual people who know him better than anyone, and whom he can't win over with the same old tricks. And as far as what's the takeaway from it, I still don't necessarily even want to tell you that either as a writer. The idea that multiple things may stick with you, and that you may be figuring this thing out for a little after you've read or seen it, is the best solution possible.
yeah,
If you want to be didactic, you have a lot of other mediums to use other than theater.
yeah, this will be interesting, taking it through the workshop and doing the staged reading and to see how people react to it. The thing I took away from it is right from the opening in Act One in bold is that what you would try if you could not fail. And it seems a lot of the time it's when you can't fail that you really run into the biggest problems because you don't really shield yourself from the downside risk and you go all in. And through the play, the owl character, which I really loved,
Mm.
that only comes on at at certain moments. He writes about, so he's written a poker book, the one that Mason studies, and he talks about how it's when you're on the up and up, that's when you're closest to going down, when everything's going right for you, that you're ripe for the fall. And that was
Yeah,
the part that hit me the most because I think actually I know in my own life, it's when I was younger and everything was just clicking together and uh and I lost everything a couple of times that and then when I came back I realized how valuable the things that you didn't really consider that valuable actually were. And so the reading the play triggered those memories of gamble and loss for me, which
hmm.
is very powerful.
I think one of the most complex concepts for humans to wrap their head around, which is also a very important concept for poker players as well, is the sense of being able to separate approach from results. Because results are always going to vary. We are the center of our own narrative, but we are not the center of the universe. Things will occur, things that you set into play, things that have nothing to do with you. Events may happen, and in poker, you can play something perfectly well and still lose everything because of that terrible combination of skill and luck. Um, so being able to separate those two is not something that you like ever just perfect. It's an ever challenge, and it takes like grand human awareness to understand when you've I guess the one of the best bits of writing for this is actually in White Men Can't Jump. It's Rosie Perez's monologue. You know how like well sometimes when you win you actually lose, sometimes when you lose you actually win, and sometimes when you win or lose you actually tie. Just fundamentally having to do with the ways that you can do something wrong and succeed immensely. And that's a terrible thing because you might learn a terrible lesson. Or you might do something perfectly and lose, and that could also be a terrible lesson if you just take from that like the sense of like, well, I'll never try again, or well, I did that wrong. So it's just an immense thing to parse out, just a ton of different potential outcomes from a handful of different events. Is part of what's so cool about risk theater as a concept. Is the idea of you know the fact that the tragedy isn't just in the world taking things on you. Like there's almost like in a Greek theater sense. If you're taught it wrong, you get the sense that like the world is just against you, and you did the wrong thing, but only because events conspired against you. When in a greater reality, like, well, you probably shouldn't have killed that guy and slept with that woman, even if you didn't know they were your mom and dad at the moment. Um, yeah, that went all over the place, but the greater like sense of event versus outcome is just an impossible one to figure out. We just have to
Yeah,
do our best.
and that's one of the reasons why I started up the Risk Theater. I think people just have a bad time, brains just aren't evolved to deal with probability and chance. Like some people don't even believe in chance; they believe in fate and predestination.
I make my own luck. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think what comedy and tragedy do is that they dramatize chance so that we learn how chance works. So in tragedy, it's a dramatization of downside risk. What happens when you have the foolproof plan that really should work? And then in comedy, it's the opposite. You got no idea, you got no resources, you got no chance of succeeding, and then everything comes together. So my latest idea with this theater risk is that it's sort of like a magic that conditions how we take risks in life. So we have and I call it more Lysistratas and less
Mhm.
Lears, because the Lysistratas, they're the young people tinkering in their garage, and they got no chance of succeeding. So Lysistrata is an Aristophanes play. They have there's a brutal war going on in ancient Greece, and no one's stopping the war. The profiteers and the warmongers and the politicians, they're all making money off this war. So there's a woman, Lysistrata, and she's like, I've had enough. And she comes up with the most unlikely plan to end the war. She's going to have a sex strike. And
Mhm.
she bands together with the Spartan women and the women from all over Greece. They have a sex strike and they get the men all hard, but they're not going to make love until they end the war. And then it works. So the world is saved. And then in Lear, you've got a guy that already has it all, and he just wants a little more security. He's like, oh, I want to retire, and then maybe there's possibility of friction down the road, so I'm going to just divide my kingdom into three. And that's just a risk that's like not worth taking. You're risking things that you need and you don't have for things that you really don't need.
Mhm.
And what happens is everything that he's worked for, his happy kingdom, he destroys his happy kingdom. So tragedy, by showing people at the height of their power going down, teaches people to be more risk averse. But comedy, by showing how young people, against all odds, succeed, they help the young people believe in themselves. And it's sort of the opposite. Like we teach kids to be risk averse. There's we read them like the the tale of the flight of Icarus. You don't fly, you fly a little lower. You don't fly up to the sun. But really, we need to be telling the kids that you gotta go as high as you can until until the sun melts your wax, and then like humanity will be taken forwards. But no parent's going to really do that because it's just they want their kids to like look after them in their old age. But it and then people get into trouble with risk as they get older. They learn all these like Humpty Dumpty, Red Riding Hood. They learn that these stories that they were taught when they were kids is not true. A lot of times you can take risks like Mason Wright, and then you're hauling in $20,000, $30,000 in one night, and the only way to do that is to take risks, and we become too gung ho on risk as we get older, and then you see people blow up. You see these gamblers blow up.
Mm.
So
You think there's like a pent up sense of things? It's the idea of not like taking small risks throughout a life, and instead yeah, then you just sort of party and explode with it.
yeah,
It's also interesting. We are really hardwired this way. Like it's something that we need to fight ourselves because it's been proven time and time again that people obsess far more often about small things they've lost than large things they've gained.
Yeah.
Like the very nature of your brain is designed to go in that direction, as ass backwards as that may be.
And this is why, and this is why Mason writes Last Night in Town is it touches on these discoveries that the psychologists are, I think, just in the last couple of decades, starting to figure out how the brain rewards losses and failures. Like for each time you win $20,000 at it, each time you lose $2,000 at a table is psychologically harder than, like, you can't win $2,000 and lose $2,000 and be even Steven. You really need to win $20,000 per every $2,000 loss to be even Steven, which is how the brain. Like I was reading this book, I think it's Amos Tversky, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he was saying exactly like what you're saying on like how the brain punishes and rewards us with the serotonin and the dopamine and the different chemicals. The losses really hurt us more than the wins.
Yeah.
And this play, Mason Wright, it it does such a good job of exploring that, which I think it's a very timely play right now to bring in playwriting to explore the same topics that a lot of science writers and philosophers are looking at now. So there's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Michelle Vuker has a book on You Are What You Risk that came out, I think, last year. She talks about how we just don't get risk, and you're screwed up. And then there's Nassim Nicholas Taleb's The Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness. He's a trader. He's a trader that's turned into a philosopher, and he talks about how people like Jesse Livermore blew up in the 1920s and the 1930s, like the richest guy in the world. He invented a way of technical trading. He started that. Technical trading is you look at the tape, the tape of and the volume and the price of different stocks, and he saw how he was motivated by the psychology of the crowd, so he invented a way of looking at that. He was born in 1877. By the time he was 13, he was making the equivalent of $30,000 every couple of months. 13, 14-year-old kid. By his 20s, he was worth a couple of $100,000. By like the 30s, he was buying yachts. He was worth millions. And on 1929, in that big stock market crash, before that, his ticker tape told him that the end was coming, so he just shorted the whole world. And the day that everything crashed, he made the equivalent of $3 billion of today's money on that one day. But 3 years after, he declared bankruptcy. He was bankrupt 3 years after that, and then I think 10 years after that, he went into a hotel cloakroom and he shot himself with a 32. Like people
Oof.
don't get risk, and it's like when I read Mason Wright's Last Night in Town, I think so many people can really relate to how he goes, like the euphoria and the mania, how he goes up and down. Like, what do you think about poker as like a analogy to life? You must have been thinking about that when you're writing this, Josh.
Yeah, it definitely shows its share of parallels. It's funny, like it is also, you know, not quite an obsession of mine, but at times in my life it definitely has been. I think it's you know, an interesting game as a relationship to life. Also, like in addition to the things I was talking about as far as the way you can do something right and things can go wrong anyway, the weird combination of luck and skill. Um I think it's I would almost argue it's a better game than chess because of the fact that you have imperfect information, because of of cards not being out there. It's an extremely dull game if you put it all out, and there are forms of poker that are less exhilarating than others because more is revealed. I think we were talking about the Cincinnati Kid the other day, and that's like a 5 card stud game that's really hard to imagine getting that thrilled about because your cards are really just so visible. You just have the couple hole cards there that otherwise distinguish what's a perfect information game. Um, so it has those parallels. It has the sense that that you know, I think people think, as they often do in life, that they should be putting up a major front when they shouldn't, because I think some of the worst poker players in the world are the ones that are attempting to be actors. There's very obvious psychology to this. Act strong and you're weak, act weak and you're strong. When like the reality is that you should be trying to be as neutral as possible if you can at all times, and all of that other stuff is just garbage to the game. So those are like, yeah, there's a bunch of other things to think about there. I'm not like a grand poker philosopher there, though I was definitely thinking about some of the ones that I've read when I was coming up with those segments by the owl as he's reading from his book, and
The owl's really good.
theorizing on the wives he's lost and the games he's lost, and otherwise making fun of the reader a fair amount. Um, so yeah, it's a great game. Just keep your shirt.
Now, how often has this been done in theater? I know that in movies it's been done a little bit, like The Hustler, Cincinnati Kid. But what about the
I can't think
theater?
of a ton of theater. I can't think of a ton of poker theater, though I've got to be missing some. There was a pretty good play by Patrick Marber called, I want to say, Dealer's Choice. He later went on to do Closer, and I think he directs a lot of theater now at this point. Um, so yeah, I haven't seen a ton of it, which is probably part of why I wanted to do it. I've thrown little bits into games before, into plays before, but this was definitely going deeper in. And I had to make sure that I was still dealing with something that where poker is the device and not the point. Where yeah, no one needs to actually know a damn thing about it to understand the kind of game that Mason plays, and why it kind of fizzles out too. Um, but yeah, there's got to be more. It's mentioned, it's alluded to in a whole bunch of works. A poker game is the starting point of American Buffalo, for example. The discussion around it and the feeling that somebody robs somebody. But yeah, I think one of the things I'm least interested in poker, as far as narratives are concerned, is actually people who cheat. It's a bit of an older idea. If you're at a poker club at this point, no one's going to let you get your hands all over the deck, as I think happens in rounders. It's much more interesting to just you know, to imagine the game as it is, and those people who try to inflict their will upon it, for better and worse. Those who are meek, the ways it reveals character in that way.
Yeah, and that could be very dramatic too. For I think in painting, there's a Caravaggio with a poker. He dramatizes the whole cheating poker scene in a painting. I'm not sure if it's Caravaggio, but it's on. I think the cover of a book called The Taming of Chance. I'll have to see what it is. But yeah, there seems to be. Yeah, I can't think off the top of my head of but it seems like such a good fit, Josh. Like the poker is inherently dramatic of a game,
Hmm.
and playwriting and theater is inherently a dramatic medium, and you put them together.
Thanks. I'm glad it worked on you. Like I said, I wasn't. I definitely had to make sure that I wasn't going too deep here because yeah, the idea is that someone with no interest, with even no real sense of the rules, can still understand the risk he's taking and the direction that Mason ultimately ends up in.
And this is a good moment to get into our sponsor, which is Risk Theatre. So I've got if people have been interested in Risk, I've got two books that you can pick up. This is the first book. I spent 13 years writing this. It came out in 2019. It's on Amazon. So this is the blueprint of how to bring risk into theater. And this is actually a poker hand. So this is the dead man's hand, a pair of black
Hmm.
aces on eights. And I thought that was a cool image that if you have the eyes to see, I doubt anyone really would catch that. But for the few people out there with the eyes to see, they would be like, oh, that's the dead man's hand. And in the game of poker, in the Wild West, there's this guy, a cowboy, Wild Bill Hickox, and he was like a lawman, and then he was an outlaw. He did all those things. And his last poker game, he was went into the saloon in Deadwood, and he was sitting with his back to the entrance, and he wanted to trade seats, but he couldn't trade seats. And then someone came in and shot him, and this was the hand that he was holding when he died. And to me, it signifies the impact of low probability, high consequence events. The chances of pulling out the dead man's hand are negligible, but then when it happens, it has a big impact, and we're not thinking about those sort of risks, but it's the sort of risks that we should be thinking about. And then this second book came out in 2022, and it's got three of the previous winners and finalists of Risk Theatre in there, and a collection of different essays on risk that I've written since the first book, which is so they're both available on Amazon. And also, if you're interested in risk, there's a collection. I've got a collection of essays I've written. They're on brown.academia.edu/Edwin Wong. So that's brown.academia.edu/Edwin Wong. And a good place to start might be the Romeo and Juliet essay, or the one on Thomas Hardy if you're into novels. And Josh, so you're at joshdrimmer.com. People can find out
Hmm.
you there. And you're
Yep,
also
and also on.
NPX.
Hmm. That's my big web presence. I keep my Twitter account to myself, as one should. But yeah, a whole bunch of my plays are on NPX. A little bit on the website about like I've done a tiny bit of writing in there in terms of in thinking about like some of my feelings on the blending of comedy and drama within plays. And there are also links to some playlists that correspond to my scripts as well. I'm one of those people that soundtracks my own work. So yeah, there's a bunch there. Check it out.
Yeah, and before I go, what are the next things that you're working on, Josh? Is there anything you can share?
Yeah, I'm currently working on a adaptation of a Mikhail Bulgakov novel called White Guard. He's a Ukrainian author, best known for The Master and Margarita, but White Guard is really about a family being torn apart during the many trials and tribulations around Ukraine in 1918 at the end of World War One. That play is called Saint Ukraine, and we're currently working on capital and other matters there. Christopher Carter Sanderson of Guerrilla Rep solicited that one from me, and we're at work. I'm kind of working on something right now based on the 10 plagues. I don't know if I'm going to take it much further than that, but yeah, that's the other thing that's currently in the queue, and yeah, some further work on this script as well. Looking forward to the workshop a lot.
Yeah, well, let's sign off there, and it's September, so in watch out in November. We'll do the staged reading towards the end of November, and I'll do a social media blast. So thank you so much, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for checking out the interview.